Eek, 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 everybody. Hey, how are you? It's Thursday night, and welcome to Mindfields. This is episode 146 of Mindfields. I think the first about 100 of them got struck off by YouTube when we lost our first channel, McDuff, Kennedy's Man to Smash the CIA, which was a big loss. George Webb went through a worse loss, a much worse loss. He had over 100,000 subscribers when his channel was taken down, and I can imagine how that feels. I had about almost over 11,000, and geez, it takes a lot of work to get up to that. Right now, we are at over 7,000 here on this channel, and over 1,000 on the other channel. So we're building back, but it's taken me a year to get back to 7,000. That's just the way it is, and I think you get shadow banned, and it's hard to get visibility. But on the other hand, we've got a great team with the neighborhood news studio crew, and Andy DeBala and Aaron Adler, um, and all of the great content providers too. Andy, you are here. Hello, Andy. Andy's off stage. He says, "No, no, don't bring me on. Don't bring me on." Okay, all right, all right. Well, you've been working hard, so I'll give you the night off, my friend. Oh, did you get a haircut? Oh, he's shy, ladies and gentlemen. Andy DeBala. You never knew him as a shy person, did you? But oh, he's very shy. Yeah, he's hiding his face now in his hoodie. Right. Oh, now he's doing his Igor, Igor. Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm entertaining myself and not you. I apologize. Oh boy, gosh, David Underdown. Oh, the poor guy. Um, um, I think he's better today, but giving him uh, what a superb show it was last night with David, with all of his ability to just put everything in a nutshell the way he does. We're working towards a goal here of putting together a series of potential witnesses that I think could make a monumentally strong case, especially if Andy DeBala is willing to take the witness stand. Because I tell you something, folks, it doesn't take a PhD to be an expert. And I think Andy has demonstrated an incredible ability to put together these medical, what do you call them? The studies that are printed in the medical journals and all, and to go through them and to sift through for the truth and get to it. And man, his shows. Honestly, I today I had I couldn't get myself off of the computer today, and that's because so much exciting stuff is going on. Let's Andy, what you got there? You got oh, this is your Twitter feed, okay? And I'll just say this: Ralph Barrick has got some splaining to do. Andy DeBala has busted Ralph Barrick. Um, this is a tremendous show from last night. There's two shows that you got to see. Andy, go over to your YouTube so we can show folks these shows. I want them to go to Andy's YouTube channel, and this is very important stuff, guys. Um, Andy's YouTube channel is called Live with Andy. Okay, and I just want to show you these two shows, which I think are just fabulous. Well, now all of the shows that he's been doing on this channel have been amazing, and as I'm not a scientist, but I have done a good bit of reading in my life, and it is really remarkable series of videos can explode the whole gain of function game. And who's in the center of it is this guy, Ralph Barrick. So this one here, the gain of function symposium, is incredible. Now, Now, Andy, I want to make a point about this particular one that let's see, where is it? Okay, I am going to share my screen for a second because I've got a particular segment of that I just want to show. Okay, so pardon me for jumping in with my share your screen function, and let's see if we can do this. All right, now just get in a kind of an open-minded state for me for a second. Okay, just let me make a suggestion to you, and don't reject it out of hand. Just think about it for a second. Okay, this is the group of the top virologists in the field of coronavirus, and they are holding a symposium back in, I think, what was it, 2014, wasn't it, Andy? And the subject comes up of, can we do this? Can we do this gain of function research? And should we do it? Is it ethical? And while this talk is going on, I'm thinking of what I've learned from Sean Ross about the ancient empires and the Templars and how they use symbology to send a message. For instance, you've heard me talk about the purple lapels on the Clintons when they conceded. That is a deference to an empire, to an imperial symbol, the royal purple, right? So what I think that I want to impart to you from what I've learned from Sean, and I think he's done a great job of illustrating this in many ways, is that it's the Freemasonic idea of the square and the compass. The square, of course, is represented by squares or 90-degree angles, and the compass is represented by a circle, or in the case of the Freemasons emblem, it's represented by a actual compass, a mason's compass, a carpenter's compass. And that is set out at a 60-degree angle. Now, the 60-degree angle is represented in the equilateral triangle. Okay. So if you want to send a secret message of we're Freemasons, we're Masonic, we're in the club, okay, then you could send that by symbols. And in this case, you have the symbol of the triangles, which represents the 60 degrees, which represents, three 60-degree angles is 666, right? Because in numerology, you cast away the zeros. And this represents the circle, the 666, or the triangle. Whereas you have the number 4, which represents the square. And there's 4 triangles behind the dais there. So what Sean says is when you see the combination of 4 plus 3, they're saying this is us. This is us. We approve of this. This is our message. And whether you accept that or not, I think that if you just let that idea sink in and consider it as you observe things, you might see a truck go by with a square and 3 dots on it, or for instance. That's what he's been doing all over Europe for a little while now, is putting together these symbols. So I just wanted to show you that the room has triangles all around it, but just the way that this is framed to me tells me that it's a message of the 4 and the 4 and the 3. And I think there's something behind that, just the way that I think there's something behind the purple lapels that the Clintons wore when they conceded the elections. All right, stop sharing screen. Now, aside from our brother Andy, who's just you got to watch those videos. That's all I can say. If it takes you 4 hours, it takes you 4 hours. You're going to have to watch them because he has broke down this intentional deception. I won't go very much further because I don't want to lose this channel tonight. But you'll see what Andy has done over at his channel. And by the way, he's very courageous. He's putting it right out there. He's all set to to put up another channel if he has to. God bless you, Andy and Aaron and the whole team there at Neighborhood News Studio. Excellent, excellent stuff. Now, the other content that I've been watching today is Mark Kulak at Housatonic Live, Housatonic Live 2. I was up at 7 this morning watching him, and I watched him for like 3 hours, and then I got stuck watching Andy because these content is just terrific. But with regard to Mark's work, first of all, it's a bigger picture look than what Andy's doing, and but it's completely consistent with it. And that is the idea that behind all this there is a greater project going on, and it has to do with gene therapy, the use of the use of a CRISPR technology, which can actually go in and alter your genes, if you let them, or alter the genes of an infant without their permission. The theory, of course, is look at all the wonderful stuff you can do. You can prevent defects. You can maybe you can prevent cancer. It's all theoretical, though. It's all the idea is that if you can just understand the tiniest little particles and how they all fit together, then you can play with life like it's a Lego set. Like it's a set of children's blocks. And that's not the way life works, as Marcus has emphasized. Life is about environment, experience. It's not just something that you are born with and use up as you live. It's experience. It's the atmosphere. It's the water. It's everything. It's the other people around you, and this uniqueness of every individual. They're trying to deny that. They're trying to make us into interchangeable, you know, whatever they want, serfs, sex toys, whatever they need. Well, my topic tonight is free floating anxiety, and many of you will be aware of the articles that are circulating, based on a work of a Dr. Matthias Desmet or Desmet. I think it's a Belgian or Dutch name. Uh, there is an interview with him November 5th, 2021, with Wisconsin Citizens Media Cooperative. And I thought I would just share some of the summary of what Dr. Matthias Desmet, a Belgian professor of clinical psychology at Ghent University, who holds a master's degree in statistics. Okay, and I'm not going to play the video, but you should do that. But I'm going to read the summary. Um, After noticing some anomalies in the statistical analyses being conducted during the early pandemic, Desmet became concerned by the consensus narrative he was reading in the mainstream. In this interview, he suggests that a phenomenon of large scale mass formation has risen from four psychological conditions that currently exist that are closing off human thinking. Desmet postulates that people don't necessarily act from an evil intent, but more a psychological process to survive these conditions that is 95% subconscious. The four conditions that allow mass formation to emerge are: one, lack of social bond. According to a national survey in the American Sociological Review, 25% of people said they don't have a single close friend. I have to stop and say, I lost a close friend just as I was starting working with George, one of my most tight music buddies, who's I think just had a bit of cognitive dissonance and couldn't deal with the fact that I was no longer, one of those liberal people. I had changed, and so I lost that friend. I hope it's not permanent, but this is happening all over the place. This is part of the whole program. So if they can incite us to separate, lifelong friendships, then they can achieve this. Number one, lack of a social bond. 25% of people said they don't have a single close friend. 75 million adults aged 18 to 27, comprising the millennials and Generation Z, were lonelier than any other U.S. demographic. It's a psychological social media paradox. People are interacting together online with their avatars, but they aren't their true selves. They don't create the intimacy or vulnerability that comes from shared experience, thereby suffering from a crisis of lack of community. And put this in again in music in terms of myself as a musician. I was lucky enough to have a couple of great holiday gigs this past weekend, and I saw a person there that I know casually as an artist, a graphic artist, a terrific oil painter, highly talented. And just in a matter of small talk, hello, and well, I said, it's great to get back together and play, after not having gigs during the COVID, and she said, well, do you get together on online with like a Zoom thing or anything, and or I guess that doesn't work. And I said, no, 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 that doesn't work. Um, and it's not just because of the little timing problems that you have. Uh, I guess the what I would have said if I'd thought of it at the time would be, would you like to look at an oil painting, or would you like to look at a computer display that has an oil painting shown on it? Because that's about the same thing as if you're listening to somebody, in your headphones from a computer, or earbuds or something that you've rigged up, and it's just not going to be like a human. It would cost thousands and thousands of dollars to make that more of a human experience, and I don't think it's feasible, because you need to be in that space. You need to have that musical intimacy, and that's what I enjoyed so much with my good friends Julia and Larry this weekend, was that musical intimacy of just being able to feel it while you're playing. Um, Lack of social bond, and that's the way I would illustrate that, and I think that's happening all over the world. You don't get to go dancing, you don't get to play your music, you don't get to hear live music. Two, people experience life as meaningless or senseless. In David Graeber's book, Bullshit Jobs, when he asked whether people think their job is meaningful, 50% answered not at all. A Gallup poll from 2012 done with people in 142 countries revealed that 63% of respondents admitted to being so disengaged at work that they were sleepwalking through their day, putting time but not passion into their work. Three, free floating anxiety. Anxiety is generally connected to a tangible mental image, like being chased by a lion. But if people feel socially isolated and that their life has no meaning, their anxiety isn't connected to a mental representation. This free floating anxiety is creating a deep psychological discontent. In Belgium alone, 300 million doses of antidepressants, antipsychotics, and sleeping pills are used each year in a population of 11 million people. A study from the World Health Organization says that 1 in 5 people, over 300 million, actually have anxiety disorders. That's odd. 300 million is not enough to be 1 in 5 people. Hmm. They not only have anxiety, but qualify as having disorders. And there are psychological orders in the diagnostic uh, manual of the psychology people uh, of a couple of different degrees of anxiety, which are termed, actual disease, psychological illness. Free floating frustration and aggression. People feel frustrated and aggressive without really knowing the cause of their annoyance and anger. Yeah, I'm angry, but I don't know why. You know, I'm aggressive. Mob psychology. Okay, this is where it all comes together. When these four conditions are fulfilled, if a narrative is distributed through the mass media, identifying an object of the anxiety and providing a strategy to deal with the object, mass formation can thrive. All the free floating anxiety and anger, now turning into panic, becomes attached to the object. Sudden connection through this heroic struggle together against the object creates a new solidarity, a social bond that has been lacking, which in turn creates meaning. People then feel that they can control their psychological discontent by participating in the strategy, even if it's utterly absurd. Participation in the strategy has nothing to do with facts. It's to preserve this new social bond created by fighting together to defeat the object of their collective anxiety. By obeying this strategy, people can go from a very negative, isolated state to the polar opposite, a state of maximum connectedness. That creates a kind of mental intoxication that makes people willing to go along with anything, even if it is utterly wrong and illogical, or if they stand to lose everything that is important to them personally. They parrot the corporate narrative and adopt the same authoritarian, shaming language they hear from their leaders. This is the summation of hypnosis. With hypnosis, attention is focused on a small part of reality narrated by the hypnotist. Just like hypnosis, people absorbed in mass formation are not aware of what's happening outside the small focus of attention that the corporate media narrative provides. Um, I think that's enough out of that article. The next half of it is also worth reading, but it's more politically, looking at Trump and not the general idea. So the general idea is that we have a society in which 1/5 of us are clinically suffering from anxiety of one form or another. And with that as a kind of a reference point, we can see that they can build more anxiety, and probably that 20% wasn't there before they started their program of making us anxious, right? Because this anxiety has been programmed into us. That's where, we can go back to Bernays, and we can go back to Walter Lippmann, and the idea of propaganda as a good thing. Because if you can create a narrative that the common people will accept, then you can do things behind the scenes as the wise ones, the elite ones, the the ones that have been chosen, perhaps even chosen by God to make these decisions, whether oligarchs or emperors or popes. They have this idea that they have the whatever, the mojo to make these decisions that are going to perhaps cause a genocide. And it is the media that does it. And this has been very well planned out. You've probably seen or heard us talk about the Russian, um, gosh, Andy, what's his name? Benizov, Bezimov. You remember his name, don't you? He doesn't remember his name. The Russian that basically, in a professorial way, explained to us that uh, the USSR, the Soviets, um, were yeah, there he is, Bezmenov. Yeah, and there's YouTubes with him in which he explains what they were doing. As a KGB, the idea it was to demoralize us. It wasn't like they were over here spying on our, aluminum plants or our chemical industry. Of course, they were doing that too. But what they're really doing, the real program is to demoralize us, to take away our allegiance to, for instance, the flag, to our communities, to our churches, to just to demoralize us generally. And that, of course, has been part of the program from the Tavistock Institute in Britain, also from the Rockefeller Institute, and the whole Skull and Bones regime. It's all about creating a secret society of people who claim that they can manipulate the rest of us. So, from Goebbels to now, okay, I like to watch him. He's a good speaker. From Goebbels to now, it's been clear that the television is the main avenue of mind control. And boy, when you start realizing that even good old Walter Cronkite was part of it, he was a New World Order guy, and he was willing to do that. Uh, and that's the way it is. And you just loved it because it was his, like, oh, that voice is like honey. And he's like, I'm gonna convince these people that we're really fighting this Vietnam War, and we're the good guys, and that's the way it is. Um, all of this, the use of music and culture to destroy uh, people's religions and comedy, things like Mel Brooks, even, uh, the idea of making comedy out of anxiety, high anxiety, or really all of his work is all about anxious people that are just stressed and willing to take chances because they're crazy, um, and crazy characters. I mean, Cloris Leachman. I mean, uh, and our very own Igor, um, uh, Marty Feldman. All of that. But there, Gene Wilder. Talk about it anxious, you know. So the idea of making anxiety into a good thing portrayed through comedy in the media, I think is part of it too. But at any rate, it contributes to this idea of free floating anxiety that, yeah, everybody's nervous, and so I'm nervous too, and it's normal to be anxious. Well, there are reasons to be anxious, and there are reasons to be concerned. One of the reasons that I think that we really should be looking seriously at things, and this is one of the strengths, I think, of the Schiller Institute and their concentration on the economic side of our problems, is that this this whole financial system is now at this point, just held together with baling wire and Elmer's glue. And I got a from William Engdahl today, his latest newsletter, which I think really does a great job of focusing us in on the financial side of our anxiety. Why are we worried? Why is David Underdown so worried about our finances? And it's because he's an expert in how to value stocks, and he's thinking, my God, where's the real value? Where's the productivity? Where's the actual, uh, price to earnings? All of the normal things that you use to value stocks are no longer giving us the data we need, because the numbers seem to just be kind of free floating. You don't know. How do you know? And the exchange rate of the dollar. That's the subject of Ingdahl's essay here. I'm going to read some of this. And please do consider supporting William Ingdahl at williamingdahl.com. He's been working on this stuff for many years. He's associated with NewsBud, or has been. And just uh, his books, like Seeds of Destruction. I mean, have Seeds of Destruction right here in hand. That's how closely I keep his work. And by the way, Mark Husatonic, you've been talking about the connection between genetic engineering of food and genetic engineering of humans. And this book right here, I think, is absolutely essential on that issue, the hidden agenda of genetic manipulation. Um, so this is chapter 14 from his book, um, The Gods of Money, Wall Street and the Death of the American Century. This book was published, I think, in 2009, but don't let that bother you. This is a general summary that starts back in 1971, the year, of course, June 6th of 71, when my dad died, and August of that same year, when Nixon and George P. Shultz took us off of the gold um, standard by refusing to trade our dollars for gold anymore. Chapter 14. Nixon walks away from Bretton Woods. You've shown how the United States has run rings around Britain and every other empire building nation in history. We've pulled off the greatest ripoff ever achieved, quote unquote, from Herman Kahn of Hudson Institute in 1971, when informed how U.S. payment deficits could be used to exploit other countries. 1971, beginning of the end game. The early 1970s were a watershed in policy for the American establishment. Dramatic measures were needed to ensure the continued domination of the United States as a global economic and financial superpower. It was not at all obvious how they would do it. Soon enough, however, the powers that dominated Wall Street developed a strategy. With Lyndon Johnson's war in Southeast Asia escalating, along with its costs, international banks and central banks accelerated their selling of dollars and buying of gold. By 1968, the federal U.S. budget deficit, fed by exploding costs of the war, reached an unprecedented height of $30 billion. Gold reserves continued to fall precariously close to the legal floor of 25% allowed by law under the Bretton Woods Treaty. Political disarray within Johnson's administration increased the financial flight as Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, widely viewed as the architect of a no-win war strategy, handed in his resignation. The Vietnam War strategy had been deliberately designed by Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, National Security Advisor George Bundy, along with Pentagon planners and key advisors around Lyndon Johnson, to be a no-win war from the onset in order to ensure a prolonged buildup of the military sector of the U.S. economy. The American voter, Washington reasoned, would accept large costs for a new war against an alleged, quote, encroachment of godless communism in Vietnam, despite the gaping U.S. budget deficits, as long as this produced local jobs in defense plants. Does that make sense? I'm going to keep going with this for a little while. I can't read the whole essay, but I think the first few paragraphs are quite worth it. So that's when, our local Main Street economy starts to crumble, and the jobs are all going to be in the defense industry, like it is right here in Southern Maryland. The Under the U.S. dictated Bretton Woods rules, by inflating the dollar through huge spending deficits at home, Washington could, in effect, force Europe and other trading partners to swallow U.S. war costs in the form of cheapened dollars. Get it? You see that? They end up bearing the burden of our expenditures on the war because we force them to accept inflated dollars. So long as the United States refused to devalue the dollar against gold to reflect the deterioration of U.S. economic performance since 1944, Europe had to pay the cost by accepting dollars at the same ratio as it had some 20 years before, despite a huge inflation over that period. To finance the enormous deficits of his Great Society program, as well as the Vietnam buildup during the 1960s, Johnson, fearful of losing votes if he raised taxes, simply printed dollars by selling more U.S. Treasury bonds to finance the deficits. In the early 1960s, the U.S. federal budget deficit averaged approximately $3 billion annually. It hit an alarming $9 billion in 1967 as the war costs soared, and by 1968, it reached a staggering $25 billion. The European central banks began to accumulate large dollar accounts during this period, which they used as official reserves. the so-called euro-dollar accumulation abroad. Ironically, Washington in 1961 had requested that U.S. allies in Europe and Japan, the group of 10 countries, should ease the drain on U.S. gold reserves by retaining their growing dollar reserves instead of redeeming the dollars for American gold as mandated under the terms of Bretton Woods. The European central banks, in turn, earned interest on these dollars by investing in U.S. government treasury bonds. The net effect was that the European central banks thereby, in effect, financed the huge U.S. budget deficits of the 1960s Vietnam War they so opposed. Now, here's where it gets ugly. Hot money in offshore euro dollar markets. Beginning in the late 1950s, the major New York banks had greatly increased their power and influence through a series of bank mergers. Rockefeller's Chase National Bank had merged with the Bank of Manhattan to form Chase Manhattan Bank, headed by John J. McCloy. Now, we've talked about him many times. John J. McCloy, Rockefeller's attorney and a Rockefeller Foundation trustee, as well as chairman of the New York Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. McCloy had recently returned to New York after serving as U.S. High Commissioner in Germany. Yeah, where he let all of the Nazis go. The paperclip doctors. McCloy, Rockefeller's lawyer, running the Nuremberg trials. Hmm. The National City Bank of New York took over the First National Bank of New York to form Citibank of New York, later Citibank, under the chairmanship of James Stillman Rockefeller. Other large New York banks, including Chemical Bank, Manufacturers Hanover Trust, and Bankers Trust, underwent similar mergers and consolidations. According to a 1961 U.S. Department of Justice report, the five largest New York banks, dominated by the two Rockefeller banks, controlled 75% of all deposits in the nation's largest city, the world's international financial center. The remarkable concentration of money power into those few New York banks by the 1960s would prove decisive in determining international political and financial developments for the ensuing 4 decades into the 21st century and the financial securitization crisis of 2007. To facilitate this extraordinary concentration of financial power, the U.S. government exempted banks from U.S. antitrust laws prohibiting undue concentration or cartelization. By the 1960s, these new consolidated and enormously influential New York banks moved to create a new offshore market for dollars outside the United States, the new Eurodollar market, a name for dollars held abroad in Europe. During the late 1960s, the New York banks, led by Chase Manhattan and Citibank, began to develop a use for the billions of dollars accumulating overseas in London and continental European banks. Through astute lobbying by the New York banks, loans made by foreign branches of American banks to foreign residents had been declared exempt from the new 1964 U.S. interest equalization tax, designed to curb U.S. bank lending abroad and to stop the dollar drain. The exemption, of course, meant that the dollar drain continued unabated. As a result, U.S. banks scrambled to establish branches in London and other appropriate centers. Once again, the City of London, despite the weakness of the British economy, had maneuvered to become a centerpiece of world finance and banking through development of the vast new and unregulated dollar banking and lending market with its center in London. The increasing efforts of Washington to persuade overseas dollar holders not to redeem dollars for gold led to a growing volume of dollars more or less permanently overseas, mostly in Western Europe or London. London's sagging fortunes began once more to brighten as the City of London, the banking district, began to corner the market in expatriate US dollars. The Bank of England and London banker Sir Zygmunt Warburg, hello David Underdown, founder of the influential British merchant bank S.G. Warburg and Company, were at the heart of the growing Eurodollar offshore market. With the assistance of his friends in Washington, especially Undersecretary of State George Ball, Warburg had cleverly lured the dollars into what was to become the largest concentration of dollar credit outside the U.S. itself. The resulting London euro dollar market was also offshore, meaning it was outside the jurisdiction of U.S. national laws or central bank supervision. New York banks and Wall Street brokerage houses set up offices in London to manage the blossoming new Eurodollar casino, far away from the eyes of U.S. tax authorities. The international branches of the large New York banks got cheap funds from the Eurodollar market as well as large multinational corporations. Washington during the early 1960s willingly allowed the floodgates to be opened wide to a flight of the dollar from American shores into the new hot money Eurodollar market. Buyers of these new Eurodollar bonds, called Eurobonds, were anonymous persons, cynically called Belgian dentists, by the London and Swiss and New York bankers running this new game. These Eurobonds were bearer bonds, meaning no buyers' names were registered anywhere, so they were a favorite for investors looking for tax avoidance or even for drug kingpins or other unsavory characters wanting to launder illegal profits. What better way to hold on to your black earnings than in Eurodollar bonds with interest paid by General Motors or the Italian Autostrada Corporation? An astute analyst of the Eurodollar process noted, quote, the Eurodollar market was the most important financial phenomenon of the 1960s, for it was here that the financial earthquake of the early 1970s originated. A major turning point in the relation of the major New York banks to their rapidly growing accumulation of eurodollars took place in 1966. Like most major turns of post-war U.S. financial policy, it began with the Rockefellers' Chase Manhattan Bank. Chase moves on Lebanon. Lebanon. Ever wonder what's the real story about all these wars and revolutions in Lebanon? A confidential internal memo was circulated within the bank in 1966 on the subject of the disadvantages that American banks had in capturing the lucrative international market for flight capital. The memo pointed to the advantages enjoyed by Swiss banks that dominated the lucrative market in managing and profiting from the hidden fortunes of dictators like Marcos in the Philippines, Saudi princes, drug barons, and the like. The memo proposed that Chase open up a foreign entity to capture a major share of the booming offshore flight capital or hot money for itself. Citibank had already begun such lucrative hot money banking activity in connection with Bernie Cornfield, the fraud artist and founder of Investor Overseas Services. The Chase internal memo identified Beirut, Lebanon as the model location. Beirut was dominated by one bank, Intrabank, and its affiliated Casino du Liban, the world's largest gambling and money laundering enterprise at the time, exceeding even Las Vegas. Well, I'm not going to read any more of this really interesting article. I know it gets a little esoteric, but the point that we're making here is that as I've been seeing, and I think I've said this a number of times, our financial system has now gotten free access to all of the dirty money in the world. It's impossible to keep bad money out of our financial system. It's all of the walls have been broken down. All the safety valves have been destroyed. There's no limits now to the money laundering that's going on from what? Well, from the trade in drugs and human trafficking and all the other arms, all the illegal stuff that's going on. It's all been able to become part of our money system. And because of that, the people that are in a position to use our money system to keep themselves in power they're not going to give in. They're not going to give up. They're going to say, no, this is mine. You can't have that. No. And this is the whole point of the World Economic Forum, is to keep all the great fortunes that have been made, Uh, old Russian saying that the first money is always dirty. Um, to keep all that money and wash it and it's all clean, and your grandchildren will think that you were just a wonderful businessman and they didn't know that, you got that money through uh, the dark side of trading. How do you get rid of it now? Well, I think there's good answers with the folks at Schiller Institute and the LaRouche people, because it is a problem of the government has to seize control of these banks. You've got to put them through a bankruptcy. You've got to get rid of the the worthless paper, because just because Big Joe the Greek thinks that this piece of paper is worth $1 billion because he paid a half a billion for it, and or won it in a poker game or whatever, because he thinks that it's real money, then he's not going to want to see that bank go bankrupt, because that'll shrink his shorts, to to use a colorful phrase. So yeah, with the value going out from our dollar and our economic system having been infiltrated by these you know crooks, it makes you anxious. It makes you worry about how is life going to go on if things keep going in this way, and if you are isolated, if you are not able to do your usual, your bridge club or whatever you do to keep connected with people, friends and family. And if you're constantly bombarded in your media by messages that say, the solution, here's the solution, you know, the object, in the terms of Desmet's analysis, the object can be defeated if you just follow what we say. There's no mandates. We don't have to have a mandate, because you all you need to do is just do what we say. And if you do what we say, then, well, everything's going to be fine. How do we know that? Because we are the media, and we know that. And that's the way it is. This 9th day of December, 2021. Andy, are you doing a show tonight? Andy's doing a show tonight. All right. What time you starting? I can't hear you. I'm going to put you on the screen.
I'll
Andy,
be on at 10:30, John.
10:30?
Yep.
All right, brother. Everybody,
I'm still waking up from my nap.
Okay. All right. Well, sorry to bother you. You've been working very hard, Andy, and we all appreciate it. Okay, guys. Thanks a lot. Don't forget Andy tonight at 10:30. Good night.